Let's talk about um, uh, research methods that reduce your UX's value. So there was this career path. You could get a professional job at one point, being someone who could actually douse water. This was an actual job. They were very valuable. They were highly paid people. Water dowsers were people who could walk around a parcel of land and figure out where would be the best place to build a well or dig for a source of water for whatever purpose you had it for. This was very popular in the 1700s, 1800s, as people were trying to figure out how to find their way around a lot of new territories that basically they were throwing the indigenous people off of. And finding a source of water was the sort of key way of doing that. And the way you did it was you had this stick. It was sort of a Y-shaped stick that you would walk around, and you'd sort of just survey the land with this stick. And at some point the stick would pull itself towards the earth. It's called a divining rod. Some people use coat hangers. There are all sorts of things you can use to divine water. And sure enough, you dig, you'd find water. And it was a very popular career path for a lot of people. And the thing is, there's actually no scientific evidence that it found water in any sort of way. Turns out that most anywhere you dig, there is water under the surface, so it just sort of worked. But you could get paid big bucks if you could convince people that this was a good idea. And unfortunately, this practice of divining water and finding it under the surface turned out to be a bit of a scam. But it also has found its way, unfortunately, in various forms into the UX field, and in particular into the research field, because in essence, we're always sort of looking for ways to find out more about our users without having to do the hard work of finding out more about our users. And that's sort of the spoiler alert for today's session, that there is no shortcut for finding out more about our users. You're going to have to do the hard work. And so I thought we would start by talking about what that hard work is to begin with, because that's the key here. And so a few years ago, I was working with a team, and we needed to sort of figure out where the team was and what the team still needed to do. So we came up with this idea of a user research maturity model. And the idea behind the user research maturity model was that we wanted to figure out the difference between no research at all and what we now call strategic UX research. And there's a bunch of growth stages that teams can go through here. And so I started numbering them from stage 0 to stage 6. Which is strategic UX research, stage 0 being no research at all. And the quick summary of these is that stage 1 is basic UX research, or basic usability testing, I mean. So this is running usability tests, sort of the way we started doing it back in the 1980s. where you you ask your users to follow a task that you come up with, give them a task to do with the product. There's a slightly better version of this. We call it 1.5, where you do usability testing, but you use tasks from customer support. And this is important. This is an improvement because you're no longer imagining what people do with the product. You're at least taking the tasks from what people call into support for. There's a more advanced version of this, which is interview-based tasks, where you actually interview the participants before the proper usability testing session begins, find out what they do with the product, and then ask them to do that to watch. The basic difference here, what's making this more mature, is that we're getting closer to what the users actually do versus what we imagine that they do, right? So in this mode, the basic usability testing, we're just going on what we believe people are supposed to be doing with this thing, not what they actually do with this thing. When we get into stage 3, what we're doing here are what we call basic field studies. So we're moving out of a laboratory setting, and we're now basically doing deep hanging out with somebody, but we don't control the tasks, right? So it's much like stage 2, right? So here in stage 1, we control the tasks. In stage 2, we don't control the tasks. In stage 3, we just show up and we hang out, and whatever they're going to do that day, it's going to do. When we get to stage 4, now we do more focused field studies. And these actually are going back to controlling what it is we're going to see, right? So here we're now focusing the field study on specifics of the experience, because we've learned how to capture people, for instance, when they're onboarding with the product, or when they're doing a particular task like filing year-end reports. We're now looking at specifics in that and figuring out how to make that happen. So we're now getting more control over what we see. And then in stage 5, we do longitudinal field studies. And I'll get into this in more depth in the intensive that we have coming up. But basically in longitudinal field studies, we're looking at the entire life cycle of people using the product or service. We're looking at when they first start using it, we look at when they retire from using it, and we keep moving our way up the process. And then when we get to strategic UX research, what we're really doing here is we're pulling back the camera and not just looking at the product. Everything up until this point has sort of been focused on the product. We're getting more into the experience as we get here, and in the seeing where the experience and the product merge. And when we get to strategic UX research, we're looking at the experience plus the business, and sort of really focusing on what it means to deliver a great experience. So that's the basic idea. But when we put this together, people started asking about a whole bunch of methods that actually don't contribute to our growing our knowledge about the experience that users have, and moving our way to strategic user experience. And this is where we got to our stage -1. And these are sort of harmful methods. And the reason that I put it at stage -1 is they actually take us in the wrong direction. They give us the wrong insights. They drive us down the wrong path, and they get us into a whole lot of trouble. And so this is the what we're going to talk about today is really why that is. Why is it that we have these sort of harmful methods that have sort of come up on us? And the sort of basic understanding here is that we have to realize that every decision that an organization makes should make the experience better for users. That's the sort of core pitch of strategic UX research, is that anything that the organization has to decide is going to be an improvement for users. It's gonna somehow improve their life. I mean, if we're switching the underlying database from MySQL to Postgres, that switch better make things better for the user, for the customer, in some way. Now, it may not be obvious to them. They may never notice what the underlying database is. But if we're switching because it's got better performance, it's got better reliability, if we're switching because it's easier for us to hire administrators who are Postgres administrators than it is to hire MySQL administrators, if it's easier to grow the product in a certain direction because we need to add features that make users' lives better, and Postgres is the better way to do that, then the decision of which database we choose is really about improving someone's life. And you're hard pressed to find any decision that an organization makes that isn't really about improving someone's life. I mean, deciding to move into a market to a new region, or deciding how much staff to put on a project, or how long before the ship date is, all of those things better be decisions that end up improving the life of a customer or user or someone who benefits from the product without realizing that the product even exists. All of these things are sort of critical experiences, and we need to be in a place where that's the focus. So when we think of UX research, and we particularly think of strategic UX research, the #1 goal is to be improving people's lives at any given time. That's what we're trying to do. And so that means that every research method needs to grow our understanding of how to improve someone's life. Methods that don't do that are not helping us. And so there's a lot of methods that collect a lot of data. There's a lot of methods that allow us to sort of bring in some sort of score or list of things, but they don't really help us. They don't help us actually improve the experience that people are having. And it's those things that take us in the wrong direction, because they take resources, they cost money, they require that we have to explain what they actually mean. Most of the time, they don't really mean very much at all, and we run ourselves into issues, right? And so this is the problem, because I find myself running into teams that really wish that these things will help the experience that they're having to get people to make products better, but they don't. They actually hurt our ability to do that, and in some ways make the products worse. So I've put together a list of these. All these methods feel like they're sound, right? They feel like they are really good methods. You can even find research papers out there if you dig far enough that say that they are somehow helpful. You have to dig a little farther to get to the ones that then tell you that they actually don't do what they said they were doing. But all of them feel like they should be helping us, but it turns out they're not. And that's the issue here. The issue is that we get ourselves into this struggle because they take us away. They don't increase our knowledge. They don't make our decisions better. They don't help us improve the lives of the people that we're looking to very much make better through our products and our services. So I've put together this list. The list is basically, these are the things that I spend my time talking people out of. And so, hopefully you can be helpful and join this effort. It starts with the age-old technique that came up in the late 80s, early 90s of heuristic evaluations. There's another similar technique of cognitive walkthroughs. These were techniques first proposed. The heuristic evaluation was a label given to the technique by Nielsen and Molick. Molick later did a whole bunch of research to write why he regrets the original papers on why it was a good idea, and did a whole bunch of fantastic studies called the Q studies that basically showed that heuristic evaluations are really no better than using a divining rod to find water. Cognitive walkthroughs are basically just an inspection that somebody does, pretending to be a user, trying to find issues. These are not, the issue with these is they just take time. They can provide a little bit of value, but people use them, and the harmful part is people use them as a substitute for actually conducting research, for actually doing any of the research that we talked about in these stages. They think that we can cut some corners, and instead we can just fake it. And that's the issue with these methods. There's nothing particularly dangerous about doing them, except that they give you a false sense of confidence that you're actually learning about your users when you're not. What you're learning about is your coworkers, and that's great. But your coworkers have a real advantage over basically the domain and the understanding. They know all sorts of terminology. They understand what the product's supposed to do. These evaluations tend to stick with the happy path. They don't work their way into little, rat holes that the users easily get themselves into because they don't have the mindset that users have. And therefore they miss a lot of really valuable things that you can easily find in usability testing or some sort of field study. So these are problematic. The next one that is sort of on my list here are focus groups. Focus groups are very much a practice of groupthink. I've seen them used rarely. I've seen them used successfully, but they are very rare in how to use them, and you have to do a tremendous amount of work. The best focus group I was ever in was a focus group of system administrators, where the only prompt that we gave the group of system administrators, there were 6 or 7 of them, that we would get into a room and we would give them one prompt, and they would just fill the hour with that one prompt. And the one prompt was, tell me your system administration story from hell. And we learned a hell of a lot just getting these people to talk. But we didn't really learn much that we wouldn't have learned if we talked to them one-on-one. And in fact, if we talked to them one-on-one, we would have gotten a lot more contextual information. Like they could have shown us the systems they were talking about, and we could have seen the issues around it. But it was really fun to hear these people try to outdo each other on their worst stories. And basically what we learned was, at the time, this was back in the 90s when we learned this, is that nobody really likes getting woken up at 3 a.m. because the servers are down. And that was the big lesson that we learned. And so there's all this work that they do to overcome that. And we learned far more in the follow-up research, where we actually went to their offices and saw all the things they did to prevent their pager from going off at 3 a.m. That told us far, far more than we learned in the focus group. So we spent all this time getting all these people in a room, and then we ended up going and meeting each one individually anyways. And that we would have come to the same basic conclusions, but the value was much more valuable. So this is what we're talking about here, right? Is that these things are fine, except they waste time. And that's the sort of least damage that they do. But where I see them do the most damage is when people walk away from these methods and they think, okay, we have enough, let's go build a product based on that. And that's the problem that we have. More recently, techniques like unmoderated usability testing or session recordings, things like Full Story or usertesting.com. Recently, the people from usertesting.com invited me to keynote their conference. I said, I don't think you want me to do that. The problem with these, there's a bunch of problems with these, starting with the panels. I should have added to this list third-party panels. That's a particularly problematic thing. The basic issues with these types of tools and the things that get us into trouble, and people will say, well, it's okay if you triangulate. We'll talk about the triangulation issue in a minute, because it doesn't mean what you think it means. But the issue with these unmoderated testing tools and these session recordings is that you are actually stripping out the most valuable part of any sort of usability testing session, which is the ability to actually have a conversation with the participant. That is where 99% of the value comes from. Very little value comes from actually having them use the product. It's, when they click on the wrong thing or they stare at the screen and they don't know what they're seeing, it's really understanding what has got them stuck. And maybe you get a self-aware participant in a recording who sort of vocalizes out loud what the issue is, but most of the time you don't. And so what we end up doing is we end up falling into the trap of inferences versus observations. And when we fall into the trap of inferences versus observations, we get ourselves into trouble, because observations are what we see. They're the behaviors that we see people have. And when we see someone get stuck, we can see that on a video. We can see that in an unmoderated usability test sometimes, depending on the setup. But we can't just ask them, what's going through your head right now? What's happening? Can you tell me what you're thinking? And it's in those words, so observations are behaviors, they're vocalizations, and it's those things that tell us what's going on. Instead, what we end up doing is we end up inferring what's happening. We make up a rationale. Oh, they must be stuck because they don't understand the terminology. And we're probably wrong. In my experience, those inferences almost never turn out to be correct. The problem with those inferences is that we then go off to create a solution based on inferences, not on actual observations, not on the user telling us what is actually wrong. So when we're doing these sessions, we're basically QA testing. And we're not learning what actually has got our users stumped. We're only seeing that somehow they're stuck, or they don't complete the task, or they don't know what it is, but we don't understand why that is. And then you add that onto the fact that we're missing another key piece of this, which is we need to know what their intentions are. And if we do task-based unmoderated sessions, we at least know their intention, in that their intention is to complete the task because that's what we're paying them to do. But in things like session recording, where we're recording people who are just coming to the site and we're watching their behavior, what we don't know is what they want to accomplish on the site. We don't know what it is they're actually trying to do. And so we're inferring that if someone searches for a keyword, that they must be looking to buy the thing that they're searching for, when we don't really know if that's the case or not. And so if they walk away without purchasing, we might declare that the task was a failure, when in fact, they might just be window shopping. They might be gathering data to go do something else. And we're making all sorts of inferences on what that behavior means based on something that we inferred out of their intention, not what their actual intention is. And again, that's the difference here between basic usability testing and interview-based testing or field studies, which is when we get into these forms, they tell us their intentions. We're working with their intentions, not ours. And that difference is huge, because their intentions are far more informative than what we want them to do with the product. And then there's a couple of other problems with these things. First, session recordings are ethically wrong, right? Unless you are getting a complete, you are disclosing upfront that you are recording these people's behavior, and you tell them exactly what you're going to do with those recordings, who is going to have access to those recordings, how you're going to protect those recordings. You are actually violating what I consider to be a basic piece of ethics, which is you are capturing private information without permission. And so session recording just in general is problematic. Sometimes unmoderated usability testing sessions tell people they're being recorded, sometimes they don't. Again, that's an ethics violation. And then if you're really sort of at the point where you are using third-party panels, if you're using a third-party panel and you haven't signed up to be a member of those third-party panels, I would highly recommend you do that, because what you will find is most of those panels are basically professional usability test takers. They have forums where they actually share notes about how to get past screeners that they wouldn't normally qualify for, because they are in the business of doing as many sessions as possible to succeed. So these are the sort of key problems with these types of things. I have more stories about unmoderated sessions and professional participants if you want to go into them, but I would avoid them. Creating your own panel is much, much better, but you have to have the relationship skills to do that. Okay, so a little bit more on this. Surveys. I've talked about surveys before. I've put a resource in for a whole, but the quick answer is that any sort of surveys that are trying to discern perception of users, do they perceive something is useful, is helpful? Would they recommend this to a friend or family member or colleague? Are they satisfied? Do they think the system is friendly? Do they think the system is easy to use? All these, are they satisfied is a great one. All the satisfaction metrics that are out there. What was this easy to use? Was this hard to use? Effort scores. All of these things are problematic in their own right. They're uncalibrated, which means that my 5 and your 4 may be the same thing. They tend to average the results, or they use some obtuse formula like NPS that nobody understands why it is what it is. How you get a 10-point scale to be a number between -100 and +100 is magic. There's all it is taking a 10-point scale and introducing lots of noise to be able to get to that point. All of these things don't actually tell you anything, and more importantly, they are not connected to what users are doing with your product or service. So a user with a bad day will score things lower. IBM did a study where they found that respondents to the Net Promoter Score who actually were judged by Net Promoter Scores in their own work would answer 2.5 points higher because they understood the scale better. So all of these things are giving you numbers that you can't actually do anything with. And they're not connected to anything you change or anything you do. So basically, you've got this number, and if you set a target in the number, you have no control over hitting that target. It is the equivalent of a manager saying, that cloud looks like a tiger. I would like you to produce 4 more clouds that look like tigers this quarter. That is the amount of control that you have over your NPS score. Another thing that I see people trying to use are heat maps. Heat maps are they're not an instrument per se. They're just a way to surface data, but they are basically, we should just call them a map of lies, because they use a color gradient to give arbitrary color distinctions to numbers that may or may not have any meaning whatsoever. So what shows up as a red versus a blue versus a green on the heat map may just be arbitrary distinctions that, you know, a good use of a heat map is if you actually have 3 dimensions of data. You have an X coordinate, a Y coordinate that is accurate and precise, and you have a depth coordinate. But even then, how you decide to switch from red to orange to yellow to blue to green are arbitrary determinations, and simple adjustments in those scales completely change the meaning of the heat map. So the problem with a heat map is that it's just always lying to you. It never actually tells you the truth. And then the last two things on my list, the first one is A/B testing, and the simple description as to why, and again, we've actually done multiple Talk UX strategy sessions on A/B testing. And the big problem with A/B testing is that you create these experimental platforms that look at trying to optimize for a very specific binary choice, or in the case of multivariants, picking one over another. And anything where you feel you have to have large values of people doing something in order to get a what people would refer to as a scientifically correct result, actually tells you that you're not looking at anybody's individual experiences, right? You're moving away from the experience. And knowing whether someone presses one button or another does not tell you anything about the experience, especially because almost all A/B tests do not take into account intention, right? So you run into this problem, right? An A/B test basically measures, in the most common case, it's whether somebody buys something or they didn't buy something. And, the sum of these things is going to be 100%. So you have some percentage of people who didn't buy, some percentage who did. And success in an A/B test is if you try to get the number who buy to go up and the number who didn't buy to go down. But the problem is that it doesn't take into account intention. This has no knowledge of intention. And the thing about intention is that intention is about should they be buying, right? Is this the right product for them? Are they at a point where they want to buy it? Or shouldn't they buy? Are they just gathering information? Today is not the day they want to buy. Is this product not for them? That should say shouldn't. Here, I'm going to try it again. Shouldn't. Oh, that's closer. It's not quite there, but it's closer. Anyways, when we are talking about this buying or not buying, right? If they should buy it and they bought it, that is success. But if they shouldn't buy it and they didn't, and they bought it, that's actually a failure. Similarly, if they should buy it and they didn't buy it, that's a failure. But if they shouldn't buy it and they didn't buy it, that was success. And all of this has to equal 100%. So that means that there are some people who didn't buy who shouldn't have never bought, which means the total for buying, the target, can never be 100%. It has to be some amount less because we always have people who shouldn't buy. And as a result, we actually can't tell from any sort of conversion rate analysis whether we have gone as far as we can go, or in fact, we are stuck. So things like A/B testing also take us in the wrong direction. And every company that has tried to base products off of A/B tests runs eventually into a wall where they've optimized for conversions, but their users actually find the experiences miserable because there's no coherence and there's no ability for people to focus on what they really came to do versus just being sold at all the time, over and over and over again. So that's the key thing. And then finally, my last thing in this category is sort of the religious cult versions of jobs to be done. There's sort of a loosey-goosey version where you just talk about jobs and you refer to things as jobs. That's fine. I'm not a big fan of that process of sort of making everything into a transaction, a job to be done. I don't like the language. People only consultants and people who have adopted this sort of cult perspective sort of think in terms of hiring your coffee maker or firing your coffee maker. I'm not a fan of that idea, but it's fine. It's okay. It's a task analysis tool. Where I get into real problems with this is when you go down the sort of either Molesta or Ulwick ODI version of this, and you get into the 95,000 surveys that Ulwick uses that make no difference whatsoever, or the sort of Molesta, just ask a lot of leading questions in an interview and you know what you're doing. Not either of those things, they go in completely different directions, but neither of those things help us really understand the users. And so where we come down to all of this, and we'll take questions in a minute here, but where we come down to all of this is that there's basically some principles that we can think about which help us understand what methods are going to work for us. And it boils down to this. The purpose of user research is to understand how to improve our users' lives. And so we have to have a sense of knowing what would make their life better. And none of these methods tells us really much about what would make their life better. It tells us a bunch about what they did or didn't do, or it measures some obtuse thing like would we recommend them or not recommend them, but it's not telling us the basic core of what we need. Are we making people's lives better? If we're not making people's lives better, what are we trying to do, right? And the primary goal of strategic UX research, right, this sort of top tier approach to UX research, the goal of this is to make everybody in the organization an expert in who our users are, what our users need. We should be the world's foremost experts in those elements. And again, none of these methods get us closer to that expertise. They don't tell us why. They don't tell us what it is that's driving people to use our product, or what it is that's driving people away from our product, or what it is in their life that they're trying to do. And then the number one thing that improves an organization's understanding of users is exposure. We know from years of work that the more exposure people have to users, to seeing what the users are doing, to understanding what the users are trying to do, the better the products get. You see that relationship happen. Increase exposure, you will see improvements in the products, because seeing someone actually trying to do the things that your product wants them to do is key. So everything that we do where we actually distance ourselves from exposure is harming our ability to get the product better. And most of these methods basically do that. They distance our exposure. And that's not good. Then there are some little things, like you shouldn't have to explain how a method works. It should be obvious how the method works. If it needs explanation, like how do you get from a 1 to 10 scale to -100 to +100 in a scoring system, the thing is broken, right? People should know what actually is necessary to make it work. And the best methods don't average experiences. You cannot average someone's experience. You cannot combine a bunch of experiences. You take someone who had a great day and someone who had a bad day, and you combine them, you get an okay day. That wasn't anybody's experience, right? You have to keep the experiences separate. And finally, we don't want to detach a user's intentions from their behaviors. If the method does not take intention into account, it is not telling us anything about the experience. So those are the things I wanted to tell you about.
Jared here. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing so you'll get more videos like this. If you have any comments, questions, or thoughts, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And hey, consider joining our Leaders of Awesomeness community. It's completely free, home to over 50,000 UX leaders who regularly share questions, ideas, inspiration about their experiences. The link is in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.